So, you're just getting started in woodworking. You're probably doing what I did, scouring the internet, watching every video, reading every forum post you can find. I went down that rabbit hole, man. I tried every single beginner tip out there. Buy this, do that. Never do this. I followed the rules. I thought I was setting myself up for success. But you know what? Most of it was just noise. It didn't really help me. In fact, some of it made things harder, more frustrating. I ended up with a pile of messed up projects and a lot of wasted time. That's why I decided to put these so-called rules to the test. I went back and found the 7 most common pieces of advice given to beginner woodworkers. The stuff you see everywhere, the tips that get repeated over and over again until they become gospel. I wanted to see what was real and what was just talk. I took each tip and applied it to a real-world project, no theory, just practical application in the shop. I wanted to know what would hold up under pressure and what would fall apart, and the results, well, they were pretty surprising. Out of the 7 tips that everyone swears by, only 2 of them actually made a difference. Only 2 of them were genuinely helpful and led to a better result. The other 5? They ranged from being kind of useless to being actively bad advice that could ruin your work. So today we're going to go through all 7. We're going to see what works, what doesn't, and why. I'm going to save you the frustration I went through. Let's get into it. Let's start with a big one. Buy the cheapest tools you can find and just upgrade them later. On the surface it sounds smart, right? You're not sure if you'll stick with the hobby, so why invest a ton of money? I get the logic, I really do. But let me tell you, from personal experience, this is a trap. It's a recipe for pure frustration. You think you're saving money, but you're actually paying for it with your time, your sanity, and a lot of wasted material. These cheap tools, they're not built with precision in mind. The fences don't stay square, the motors bog down, the adjustments are sloppy. You spend more time fighting the tool than you do working on your project. You're trying to learn a new skill, which is already hard. But now, you're also trying to compensate for a tool that's inaccurate and unreliable. You make a cut, and it's not straight. Is it your technique, or is it the cheap saw? You don't know, so you try again, and again. You lose confidence. You start to think maybe you're just not good at this. The truth is, a bad tool will make even an experienced woodworker look like a beginner. It doesn't give you the clean, repeatable results you need to build skills. It's not beginner-friendly. It's beginner-hostile. You end up with more mistakes, more firewood, and a feeling that you're just not cut out for this. Trust me, it's the tool, not you. Alright, here's a classic you've heard a million times. Measure once, cut once. Sometimes they dress it up with measure twice, cut once, but the core idea is the same. It's supposed to sound like the mantra of a confident, skilled craftsperson. You measure with absolute precision, you make one perfect cut and you move on. The problem is, it's terrible advice for someone who's just starting out. It completely skips over the most critical steps in the process. It's like telling a new driver to just drive fast and don't crash. It leaves out all the nuance that actually keeps you safe and gets you where you're going. Here's what works in the real world. Measure, and then mark it. Don't just make a tiny tick mark. Use a good marking knife or a sharp pencil and a square to draw a clear, crisp line. Then, and this is the most important part, make a test cut. Don't commit your good piece of wood just yet. Grab a piece of scrap from the same material and make your cut. Check it against your layout lines. Is it perfect? Is the saw blade removing the line, or is it leaving the line? This little test takes maybe 30 seconds, but it can save you from a mistake that ruins a whole board you just spent money on. Measure, mark, test, and then commit. That's the process that builds confidence and accuracy, not some catchy but incomplete phrase. This next tip sounds so productive, so efficient. Sand everything to its final grit before you assemble your project. The idea is that it's easier to sand flat boards on a benchtop than it is to get into all the nooks and crannies of an assembled piece. And in a perfect world, that would be true. But we don't work in a perfect world. We work with wood and glue, and they have a mind of their own. I tried this on a small box project, sanding every piece up to 220 grit until it was silky smooth. It felt great, like I was way ahead of the game. But then came the glue up. When you sand wood that finely, you start to burnish it, polishing the surface and closing up the pores of the wood. When you apply glue to that super smooth surface, it can't penetrate the wood fibers as effectively. You get a weaker bond, a starved joint. Even worse, that perfectly smooth surface becomes incredibly slick when it's wet with glue. The pieces want to slide around under clamping pressure. I spent the whole glue up fighting to keep my joints aligned. It's much better to assemble with surfaces that have been machined or sanded to around 120 or 150 grit, get a good strong glue bond, and then do your final sanding after assembly. You deal with the corners then, but at least your project is solid and square. Everyone loves power tools. They're loud, they're impressive, and honestly, they throw a lot of sawdust. So the advice you hear a lot is, power tools are always faster and better than hand tools. If you're running a big production shop, making hundreds of the same part, then yeah, of course, that makes sense. But for most of us, working in a small garage or basement shop, that's just not the reality. The speed of a power tool doesn't just come from the motor, it actually comes from the entire workflow, and that includes setup time. Let's say you need to make one simple crosscut. With a handsaw you just grab it off the wall, mark your line, and you're cutting in under a minute. With a big miter saw, or a table saw with a sled, you have to clear the space around it, check the blade for square, maybe even move it into position if your shop is small, find your push sticks, put on your hearing protection. And, by the time you're ready to make that one cut, you could have been done twice over with a handsaw. It's not about horsepower, it's about workflow. Sometimes, for a single, precise operation, a well-tuned hand plane is actually faster than setting up a joiner and a planer. The key is understanding which tool is right for the job at hand, not just defaulting to the one with a plug. You want your projects to be strong, to last a lifetime, so when you're gluing up a panel or a box, the instinct is to make it as strong as possible. The tip you'll hear is, tighter clamps mean stronger joints. You see guys in videos really cranking down on their clamps, using all their muscle, until the wood is groaning and glue is squeezing out everywhere. It looks impressive, it looks strong, but it's actually one of the worst things you can do for your joint. Wood glue isn't like a mechanical fastener, it's a chemical bond. It needs to be there, in the joint, to work. When you apply way too much clamping pressure, you're not making the joint stronger, you're actually squeezing almost all of the glue out of the joint. This is called a starved joint, and it's incredibly weak. All you're left with is a thin, brittle film that can easily fail. On top of that, extreme pressure can physically damage the wood. It can crack boards, especially near the edges, or leave deep dents from the clamp heads that you'll have to sand out later. The goal is moderate, even pressure. You want to see a nice, even small bead of glue squeeze out along the entire joint line. That tells you there's enough pressure to close the gap, but you've still left plenty of glue inside to do its job. When you think of fine woodworking, you probably picture beautiful hardwoods like oak, walnut, or cherry. They're dense, they're durable, and they look amazing. So the advice follows: hardwood is always better than softwood. People look down on woods like pine or fir, calling them construction lumber. But for a beginner, this mindset can be really counterproductive. Yes, hardwood is beautiful, but it's also expensive and far less forgiving. When you make a mistake on a piece of walnut, it hurts your wallet. That adds a layer of stress to the learning process that you just don't need. Softwood, like common pine from the home center, is your best friend when you're starting out. It's cheap. You can buy a bunch of it and not feel bad when you mess up a cut or a joint, and you will mess up. That's part of learning. Pine lets you practice your technique, cutting to a line, chiseling a mortise, planing a surface smooth, without the fear of ruining a $500 slab of wood. It teaches you to read grain, to deal with tear out, and to sharpen your tools, because it will dull them. Once you've mastered the fundamentals on inexpensive material, you can move on to hardwoods with confidence. You'll appreciate them more, and you'll be ready to do them justice. This is the one. If you only listen to one thing I say today, let it be this. The tip is, focus on joinery before chasing fancy tools. This is one of the 2 tips that actually worked, and it's by far the most important piece of advice you will ever get in woodworking. The internet is full of shiny new gadgets, digital angle gauges, elaborate jigs, $1,000 machines that promise to solve all your problems. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the next tool purchase is what's holding you back. If you just had that domino joiner or that laser-guided miter saw, your projects would finally be perfect. But that's a lie. A tool, no matter how expensive, is just a dumb object. It only does what you tell it to do. The value isn't in the tool, it's in the skill of the hands holding it. Can you make a square cut with a simple handsaw? Can you lay out and chisel a clean mortise and tenon? Can you flatten a board with a hand plane? These are the fundamental skills of woodworking. They are the building blocks of everything you will ever make. Learning these skills multiplies the value of every tool you own. An expert with a basic set of tools will always produce better work than a beginner with a shop full of expensive gadgets. So ignore the marketing, buy decent, basic tools, and then invest your time and energy in learning the craft of joinery. That is the real secret. So, there you have it. 7 common tips, 5 big disappointments, and 2 solid pieces of wisdom. The journey into woodworking is a personal one, and what works for me might not be the final word for you, but I hope testing these out saves you some of the headaches I went through. It really comes down to focusing on the fundamentals, the skills, not the stuff. Learning how to make a straight, square cut and a clean, strong joint will take you further than any fancy gadget or supposed shortcut ever will. It's about building a foundation of skill, and that takes time and practice, not just a bigger budget for tools. Looking back, the worst advice I followed was definitely the buy cheap tools first idea. It cost me so much time and created so much self-doubt. It almost made me quit before I even got started. If I could go back and tell my beginner self to ignore one tip, that would be it. It's a false economy that you pay for with frustration. But I'm really curious to hear from you all. What's the one piece of beginner woodworking advice you've heard or tried that you would tell someone to ignore if they were just starting out today? Let me know down in the comments. I read all of them, and I want to see what common threads pop up. What are the bad tips that are tripping up the most people? I'll take the most common suggestion from the comments and I'll put it to the test in a future video, just like we did here. Let's keep the conversation going and help each other build better, both in the workshop and as a community. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.